Yep.
Ay,
All right.
Capitan.
All right. So we got some announcements before Rick. This evening we have Rockin Rick Kalman, and he's one of the many rock stars you'd expect to meet in person at Engage 26, except there's not going to be an Engage 26. Instead, John Howell and his fellow concert organizers are putting on the Woodstock of FileMaker conferences this year, Full Access 26. That's August 6th through 10th. It's going to be your Engage fix in since you're here at the DIGFM meeting, we'll give you a $200 discount code in the chat for the 5-day full event. Meals, rooms, and full access amenities are included for one wonderfully low price. You gotta see fullaccess.us for conference details. If you can't get full access for the number one best value uh, FileMaker Developer Conference, then there's still read-only access. That's DigFM's answer to anyone wanting remote live access to about 20% of the sessions from August 6th through 9th. Although DigFM organizers and attendees will be at the conference in person, having an in-person reunion, DigFM is also planning to have an online conference running concurrently with full access. 4 straight days of online meetups from August 6th through 9th. That's going to be Thursday through Sunday from 3 o'clock to 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be broadcasting full access sessions live. We're going to have people like Darren Terry. He's going to bring back a reshape. He's going to reshape the dependency tree with a two-part sequel to his cult classic presentation. And then we're going to have Christian Schmitz. He's going to feed you all the low-code monkeys, all you low-code monkeys, with free goodies before loosing a live workshop. And David Simpson is going to pop the hood with some Claris engineers. And surprise guest is going to fill the fourth Dig FM time slot, we hope. Oh, he's not a surprise guest anymore. Actually, it's going to be Todd Geist is actually gonna run a couple of sessions. He'll be live on Dig FM as well. But if you only attend full access online, you're going to miss so many more precious presentations, dynamic discussions, delightful dining, and fun festivities with the developers and heroes of our favorite development platform at this year's premier US FileMaker conference. That's your Engage Fix for 26. And you better check who's registered already so you don't miss out. That's at fullaccess.us. And also, what else do we got? Oh, there's more announcements. Check this out. Uh, so also for the Full Access 26 conference, we're paging all plugin programmers. All right, this is going to be the Plugins Plus Programmers Powwow Panel Plenary. It's on the plate. Claris Director Engineer of the Draco engine. That's a Clay Makel. Actually, that's him down at the bottom there. This is the bottom. That's a real picture of him, by the way, and his dad. We we AI helped us out getting Jesse and Christian there. But in any case, yes, Clay Makel's going to join plugin developers like Jesse Barnum of 360 Works and Christian Schmitz of Monkey Bread Software. They're going to be inviting you to this full access exclusive under the hood meeting to answer all the kinds of questions mainly deep dive developers would have, such as plugin programmers would want to know, like where could we discuss stuff like C++ code, which hardly ever interests non-plugin developers. That's a quote from Christian. And so the discussion begins with FileMaker plugin development, but might also plus into other topics. Whether you're already a plugin developer or you're interested in plugin development or you're just a glutton for every tidbit of FileMaker technology, this Plugins Plus Programmers Powwow is for you or for your favorite plugin developers. Call them up now and make sure they attend. Right? We've been actually bugging somebody we know and he hasn't registered yet. Anyway, so speaking of Clay Makel, Full Access 26 celebrates the 40th year for Clay working on FileMaker. 40 years is way more than, oh, this is a quote from his boss. 40 years is way more than a career. It's a lifetime of commitment and craftsmanship, especially from Clay. Uh, so we invite the developers, invite any developers you know in the FileMaker community to come congratulate, celebrate, and meet Clay in person at Full Access 26. Oh, one more announcement. Uh, do we have another SJSU alumnus among us besides John Howell, me, and we have Israel here. Say hi, Israel.
Hey everyone. Hey,
Hey, he's
hey
also
Eric.
That
He's
delivery
one.
was excellent.
Yes, he's actually one of the guys who's helping us out with this next project out. So be prepared to warmly welcome up to three SJSU students from to Full Access 26 to the FileMaker community and to DIGFM because we have at least three applications. No, actually, we have four applications. I'll just tell you right now. So that means I guess one might get cut. But in any case, we have four applicants already. Uh, they're going to be able to attend on scholarship in August as a part of a mentorship pod we're initiating here at San Jose State. We've been announcing this summer application developer experience for SJSU students for just a week or two, I think. And anyway, we missed announcing this to them before the summer break. So applications are low, but if we get too many more applicants, we could use a few more hands to help with mentorship. Actually, what was one of the other things? Oh, yeah, John and I are already too kind of busy with the conference. Anyway, moreover, we have a magnificent and magnanimous donor is also donating a short agentic development uh, with FileMaker workshop to three of the students, which is it's going to require Claude though, and not the free Claude. It's going to somewhere I think the $20 per month Claude. However, we do the campus actually has Gemini for education for students and employees. So if you know anybody who can help them hook up Gemini and get them started with that, we could use some hands for that. Anyway, so now it's going to be back to Rick. The reason he's not just going to jump into all the new features is we want him to give an overview for the new developers that we're inviting to the community. So you ready, Rick?
Sure. Let me share.
All right, so I'm going to stop my share.
All right. I'm assuming you can see my desktop.
Yes, we see your
Yeah.
keynote slide.
Okay. And then I won't go into presentation mode because it doesn't mix too well with Zoom for me anyway. And as Eric said, I'll start with a brief overview of the FileMaker platform. This is something I put together, so it's not like this is an official thing from Claris. But when asked to give a high level understanding of what the FileMaker platform is, I took that challenge. So I'll start out with this question: is what if you could build the exact app your business needs without starting from scratch? And so, as you know, there's a lot of software out there, and it does what it does. And a lot of times, if you adopt a software package, you have to essentially mold your business processes to fit what it allows you to do. Well, FileMaker is a tool that allows you to essentially create something yourself or through one of our consultants or developers that is wholly bespoke to your business and your processes. And on top of that, it is such a versatile platform that you can iterate as your business changes. You can change your FileMaker solution, so it's very adaptive in that way. So this is a platform that puts the power of custom apps in your hands and makes it not cost a fortune, like hiring someone to build something for you and compile it. Takes, let's say it took them 8 months to do it. Who knows now? It might take 3 days with vibe coding, but and then it does what it does. And then if your needs change, you got to go back to it. So FileMaker is sort of the answer to that issue in a way. So what is it, right? And I've got some examples of here's an example of something somebody built with custom with the FileMaker platform. So it's a low code platform. It's designed to build custom business apps. Of course, it doesn't have to be business, but that's what its primary use is. Rapidly, it's a product of Claris International, and if you don't know, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Apple Computer, and we've been since day one. And our product has been in the market over 40 years. So I like to say that we have been iterating on FileMaker for 41 years now. So there's a lot in it over that time because it's made it through all of that. It combines a relational database, an app or a builder for the interface. You've got relational data. You've got also an interface builder for your user interfaces, and the platform also deploys what you build with it. So it sort of contains everything you need to not only create but to also deploy. And it is used all the way from, solo entrepreneurs, all the way up to, many of the Fortune 500s, and most of the major universities are using FileMaker, and it's been around for quite some time. It's one platform that I like to say has four superpowers. It comes with its own database built in. So a lot of times you may build something and then have to go hunting for, what am I going to house the data? What am I going to attach it to? And sometimes that's a pain. It just comes along for the ride with FileMaker, which is part of the magic. Then it has a visual app builder. And most of that's drag and drop. You're not doing, coding and HTML and CSS. It's very much something that is understandable in that way. But it has very rich business logic expressed primarily through a combination of human readable scripts and calculation functions. And the combo of that is where you put all of, hey, when this person does this, then I want that to happen. A lot of the scripts are related to automation, so that you click a button and it does a number of things. That's all built in. And the other thing about it that's rather unique is you can deploy it multi-platform. And why that's unique is the artifact of creating something with FileMaker is a file, thus sort of FileMaker, if you will. There is a .fmp12 extension file. That is the output of where your database is, where your interface is, and all your logic. And that can be deployed, that single file, without any change, can be deployed to a Mac operating system, to Windows, to iOS devices like iPad or iPhone, or with WebDirect, just with turning it on in our server, a rich interactive web app without having to know anything about how to build a web app. So it's very versatile in how it can be deployed. It can be deployed in the cloud. It can be on premise. You can have hybrid combination thereof. On the right is an example of the script editor in FileMaker, and essentially it's very human readable in that sense. And then, so it's made up of a number of items that, for deployment, as I said earlier, FileMaker Pro is something that you can install on a Mac or Windows, and it's essentially a binary application that gets installed either by visiting desktops or pushed out through MDM or that sort of thing. And it's the full-blown capability of FileMaker, which also happens to contain the builder as well, the IDE, if you will. FileMaker Go is the version that allows that file that you created with FileMaker to run on iPhones or iPads. You can get it in the Apple App Store. It's a free download, and you can take. You can't build on FileMaker Go, but you can certainly consume what was built with FileMaker Pro on those devices. So if you're out in the field doing data entry, so gone can be the days of where the guy in the field writes something down on paper, hands it back to the person at the office to enter it. They try to figure out what they said. They can do it right then and there. They can be not, they don't have to have connectivity, and they can sync it if they wanted to, and so on. And we have rich APIs. We have a data API. We have OData, and essentially allows you to, through the web and other sources, to be able to communicate with the data that's sitting in the database. Then FileMaker Server is the tool that allows you to deploy that out. So there's two flavors of that. There's a literal server that you install on your own hardware. You have complete control. You have a server administrator that decides, what they want, who they want to let in, what they want to let in. Do they want it behind a firewall? Can you go out on the internet? Complete control over that. Or you can go with FileMaker Cloud. You don't want to futz with the hardware or setting up a server or be an admin. Then there's a Claris managed cloud that's in AWS, and then we just take care of all that. So that runs essentially as a service. So you've got a lot of choices on how you want to deploy, and you can mix and match this stuff as well. We are pretty much everywhere, from small businesses to nonprofits to medical to manufacturing, education, higher ed, K-12. just about any place you can think of that needs something that they want to move away from spreadsheets. I still contend to this day that people don't realize it, but our number one competitor probably is still paper. The world is still digitizing, believe it or not. If you live in Silicon Valley or some of these high-tech areas, you may think, oh, that's not true. And it's still an Excel world. So this is something that allows you to move far beyond those limitations for that kind of thing. And it is used just about everywhere. And there's a lot of rich resources on our site as well that talk about that. So you don't have to be, the old saying is, you don't have to be a computer science major. You don't have to be a DBA or a database administrator to be able to pick up our product and be able to build something yourself. And of course, you can always use one of our consultants. Essentially, it takes two things. Someone who's not afraid of tech, we like to call it tech savvy. A tech savvy person is not afraid. He doesn't think they're going to break she doesn't think they're going to break the computer. They're sort of an explorer. They tend to be the person on your team that you would probably go to and ask a question before you go to IT. And so they're considered tech savvy. That's all the level it really takes. And on top of that, if you have a motivation for a problem that you have to solve, and that's the big thing. The motivation comes from you've got a business problem and you come across FileMaker and you think it can be solved with that. And those two combined, you can either start yourself, you can get professional training, or you can hire our thousands of consultants across the world to build something for you. So there's also, the low barrier to entry. You can get results in a lot shorter amount of time. And in the agentic era, it's even going to be shorter, but having a knowledge of all the things it does is still going to be important. There are thousands of businesses out there, as I've just talked about earlier, that rely on FileMaker and need developers either in-house or as consultants working for one of our consulting firms. So it's a marketable skill. It will scale from just something very simple and one-off that you're using. It's a fantastic data muncher. It's a personal productivity tool in and of itself, but it really shines when you're using it in work groups and sharing it with team members. It's very typical for someone on the team to build something that the other people use, and also it's typical to have solutions that were built by our some of our third-party developers that are vertical, that solve problems really well. So there's a vibrant community there. We've got user groups. Obviously, you guys are an example of one of them. We've got certifications. We've got a number of developer resources. We have a vibrant online community. So if you're a student and you're thinking about FileMaker, it's a tool that we have been iterating on for 41 years. We're still here. We're still thriving. We're fully backed by Apple. And we are all on the cusp of heading into the next era, which is that of agentic coding. And FileMaker is certainly got to play there as well, that we've just been talking about. So that's a very high-level, brief overview of the nature of FileMaker. If you want to dig more, there's more than enough information. If you went to Claris.com about all the various products that we have, and then you can dig into resources, look at the community, and so on. So that's sort of a good place to start. So that's 5 or 6 minutes of high level of a platform that's fast, but just as an orientation to what you're going to see if you're not familiar, for the few of you that are newer to our platform, before we get into say, so what's new in what we just released this week? And that's FileMaker version 2026. And well, not a feature, probably one of the biggest things is we finally aligned the year with the version number. So you don't have to do the conversion in your head of, version 22 is actually FileMaker 2025, version 21 is 20, that kind of thing. We couldn't even keep track of it internally. It's now version 26 if you go into the about, and it is FileMaker 2026. So now we're aligned, similar to what Apple did with their operating systems. And so there's a lot that is in FileMaker 2026. There are about 115 enhancements that went into this release across the various pieces. And there is about a little bit over 100 in-market customer-facing issues that are also addressed. So there's a lot going on here. And so what we've decided to do is break it down into 5 major buckets or themes. And so I'll talk about what we did under each of those buckets, all the way from disaster recovery and business continuity, and then developer productivity, or what we internally call developer quality of life. There are a number of enhancements. There's about 20 that I'll tell you about. Some of those have been long requested improvements to the platform for people who develop day to day. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. As every major release of FileMaker, we do platform stability and support of the latest operating systems and stuff, and I'll cover what we've done there. We've got some fairly significant enhancements in accessibility on the FileMaker WebDirect side that I'll talk about, and some other additional enhancements to WebDirect, which is the if you build a solution or a business app using FileMaker Pro, and then you can deploy it in a browser, and that is through technology from WebDirect, and that comes strictly out of FileMaker Server, is where the technology comes from that makes that possible. But you have then a rich web app at your hand that runs in just about any browser. And then I'll end with talking about some of the additional AI-ready architecture that we put in FileMaker 2026. If you're familiar with the platform, obviously you know that we did quite a bit in FileMaker 2025 to introduce a number of AI capabilities primarily through scripts and calculations. Although we also on the server side had an AI model server if you want to host your own AI models without having to go out to some of the foundation models out in the cloud that may be sucking up your data and training other things. And so the AI model server allows you to have complete control over that. And we'll talk a little bit about some enhancements we've made there as well. And then, of course, FileMaker 2026 is also sort of foundational to what we announced last month, where we're heading next, which is the adding agentic coding capabilities for some of the most popular AI tools out there: Claude Code, VS Code, Cursor, those sort of things. And so that was announced at the beginning of May. We've had a couple of webinars on it, and we expect this summer to begin to release these for people to get their hands on. And as we build it out, and that's pretty exciting time as well. So I'm going to start with disaster recovery and business continuity enhancements that we made in the product, and it's fundamentally in 2 different areas. We now have built into FileMaker Server the ability to do remote backup in the cloud, leveraging our same cloud infrastructure that Apple maintains for us. Their security teams run that, and they run our FileMaker Cloud. And so we're taking advantage of that capability to be able to run that off of the same technology. So this is what we're referring to as remote backup. And this is essentially an S3 bucket in AWS managed through Claris and Apple in the background. Automatically, it copies your FileMaker files. It's set up exactly like you would set up backups in FileMaker Server, except this one isn't going to your hard drive or an external drive. It's going up to the cloud. It does it every 20 minutes, like they do in FileMaker Cloud. So every 20 minutes, we take the difference of what was 20 minutes before and what happened in the last 20 minutes and push that. We don't have to push everything up. We can keep track of just the changes. And so you always have the latest backup of about 20 minutes old that you can go back to. And really, this is someone likened it to insurance. It's something that you hope you never have to use, but you're happy to have it if this thing happens, right? So your server fails, your hardware fails, or God forbid, someone encrypts you with ransomware out of what you're running your business off. there's some physical disaster that literally just takes out where you had it, or just human error. Someone said, I wonder what this truncate table does. And so how do you get whole? And remember, we have businesses that are, we're in the Fortune 500. We have businesses that if they go down, it costs them thousands and thousands of dollars an hour until they get back up. So we got critical stuff running there. So it's very important to be able to go back if you need to and get back up and running as quick as possible. I'll show you some screenshots in a second. If you're not familiar, we have something called the Claris Customer Council that is similar to the server admin council in that it's web-based, but it's a place you go to manage things like the users you want to allow in, or to be able to download the software that you have the right to. And we're using that to be able to set up the remote backup capabilities. And then that has visibility on the storage and the usage and which servers it's associated with. And I'll walk you through very quickly what that has to do, what those two, how they work together. And then the backup does an integrity validation and so on. And then you can restore from there. So this is sort of this is the Claris Customer Console, and this is sort of the opening screen. And from there, you can go to get your license certificate. You can download the software that you're entitled to, and there's other resources there as well. You'll notice here that something that's new is a new tab called Remote Backup. And so when you click on that, you have an interface that allows you to create backup drives. For instance, here I created a 15 gigabyte backup drive. I just called Rick 15G. So I use this interface to set it up. It could have been 5 gigabytes. It could have been whatever I want to, and I can have as many as I want here. When I set that up initially, I'm going to get a drive ID and a drive key, and you can see both of those are copyable. And the reason is because then I need to go over to my server admin console for the particular server that I am going to associate the backup with and bind it. So that's this dialog. Now we're in the server admin console under the Cloud Backups tab, which is a new tab. And this is where you configure, and this is where you're going to have your backups. It's very similar to backups next to it here, but this is going off premise into the cloud. When this is normally blank, you register your storage. You're going to then associate the keys that we gave you. And then if you come back here, then you'll see that this drive is assigned to this server. So they have been married together in a combination of instantiated it in the Claris Customer Console, and then coming over to the admin console and saying, this storage I want associated with that server. It's pretty straightforward to do. These are add-ons, so they don't come as part of it. There are a lot of people that have already solved backups in other ways, or large enterprises that may not need it. But if you're a small business, don't have IT, and want the insurance, then this is a good play for you as well. And then you're able to go through that customer console and be able to purchase the storage through there, or you can go right through the service app. It'll take you to the store. The other thing that we have under business continuity and disaster recovery is standby server. And what it does is essentially you install a second server on a separate, separate hardware of, got your primary server running, and then you have a backup or secondary server on a separate machine. And the only thing is, it needs to be, if you got Windows, you need to run it on a Windows machine as your secondary. If you've got Mac, on a Mac machine, Linux machine. You don't have to have the exact same specs like you used to do when we previously had done a standby server, and we removed it because it wasn't quite ready for prime time, but we're there now. So it's a little bit more forgiving. And so what happens now, if you set that up, and I'll show you the interface in a second, it does an initial full backup of what's on the primary server. And then once that secondary server is set up, it does a continuous redo about every 5 minutes. So about every 5 minutes, it's taking what the primary server is happening and it's moving it over. So it's staying in sync so it would be, if the server went down at the most, it would be 5 minutes, stale. If you need to cut over, you go to the admin console and you can promote the standby to become the primary server, something that takes just minutes. So a lot of times if a server goes down, you got to get the server administrator. They got to figure out what's going on. It could take hours, sometimes days to figure that out. You're down. Well, this you can just cut over, and in a few minutes, you're up and running. You can figure out what went on. You can always go back and say, okay, now that I've fixed my old server, I'll make that the primary again. It supports Dockers. It'll run on Ubuntu version of Linux. You can use cloud VMs. You can set up a hybrid infrastructure, the combination of some on-premise and cloud. It's also the progressive backup is compatible with hypervisor snapshot, and we have some support in the admin console to help set that up. So here's in the server admin console. It's under the connectors tab, and there's a new option for standby server. And this is where you cut in, and this is server roles. This is actually a pop-up menu that has either standby or primary. So here I've said, okay, this is going to be a standby server. It has setup instructions. It tells you what to do, and you sort of start filling that out. And now you've got those two servers in sync. So that is that capability. So under business continuity and disaster recovery, two new enhancements that come with FileMaker 2026 as add-ons. Standby servers also a separate add-on because you may have already solved this, so we didn't want everyone to have to muck with it. But if you need it, it's available. Now there's a whole slew of developer productivity enhancements in FileMaker 2026, and there has been, since we launched, a lot of excitement about some of these, and some of these have been things that people have been asking for quite some time. So I'll walk through a number of these. Some of the major ones, we'll give a little bit more detail. I'll show you some screenshots so that you can see what's going on as compared to what you're familiar with prior to this. And then I'll have a list of a number of other ones that I can just talk to.
Hey, Rick.
So,
Rick, we forgot to ask at the beginning, is it okay? Should we let you go through the whole thing before asking questions, or ask questions along the way?
Here's the thing. When I presented this yesterday, what we decided to do is by theme. So now that, for instance, I just finished disaster recovery and business continuity, and we can pause and take questions. We'll try to keep track of time. So if we start going too deep, we'll move on. But it's probably better to do it by theme. So if there are questions about what I just shared, then we can take them now. And if it goes a bit too long, then we'll cut it off and we'll go on to the next theme.
Okay. Any questions on the previous stuff, server related, right?
Rick, just real quick, the standby server is also an option, right?
Yes.
And is that in the customer console where you also go to add that? No, that's somewhere else.
Yeah, it's all through the server admin console. You don't have to. You only use the Claris customer console to set up the remote storage. The standby server is just run out of the server admin console in that tab I showed you.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rick, I just want to confirm that the standby server is a local server like the original server. It's not owned by Claris like Claris Cloud.
No, it's under your complete control, right? So you're just installing another server. however you're doing it, right? Because some people run their servers in an AWS instance. Some people run them in a VM. So it's similar to that, but it's under your complete control. And whereas cloud, we manage it for you, and there's certain things that you can't do with that server because it's an environment for everyone, and Apple sort of precludes it. So people that want 100% complete control and are willing to have their own hardware and server administrator associated with that, and this is what that is. It's just another instance of server. You're just installing another server and saying, this is my secondary server.
And can I also ask if the system by default divides incoming traffic between the standby server and the primary server, or is a standby server just for recovery?
Yeah, it's just for recovery. So what's happening is your primary server is there. It's associated with the secondary server. It is sending the changes at 5-minute increments so that it's trying as best it can to stay in sync. Now, this initial version, you're going to have the server admin, if the primary server goes down, to tick over to the secondary server. But the not too distant future will make that automatic. So it'll you can set it up and say, hey, if it goes down, bring up the secondary server. And so essentially we would call that hot standby. So this is sort of warm standby. It's in sync. It's ready when you need it. You go in the FAC, just promote it over there. It's going to have, you're going to have to still deal with DNS, right? So it may not be super immediate, but in the hot one, we'll try to do as best we can. And it gets a little bit tricky because, you want to make sure that, DNS and SSL are meant to validate you are who you say you are, right? And so there's a little bit of trickiness there, but for the most part. And then, by the way, tomorrow at 1 o'clock Pacific time, FM Training TV, Rich Carlton and Jacob Taylor are going to be spending the entire hour talking about and showing setting up a secondary and primary server. So that may be worth. And it's also, he records all those as well. They end up on YouTube. So that's happening tomorrow. And then we're on the 18th doing a Claris live event on just the remote backup and backup server. And then we will jump on that afternoon also on FM Training TV for follow-up questions and answers. So the next week or so, there'll be a heck of a lot more information out there on these two things.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rick, that's 1 p.m. Pacific, right?
Yes.
Okay.
1 to 2 typically.
Yep.
Or if it's Vince, he goes 10 minutes over. So
yeah.
like today. All right, I'm going to move on to developer. And then if we have time at the end, we can entertain questions on everything. So Adaptive Inspector. This is not necessarily the most popular thing that we've done. If you are an experienced FileMaker developer who has muscle memory for our existing inspector, as you remember, our existing inspector is where all the controls of the objects on the layout as you're building them exist. It has 4 separate tabs. And now this Adaptive Inspector is down to 2 tabs. And then depending upon what object or objects you click on the layout, it will bring those things relevant. But also, there are people that, just like the old one, you still have the ability in FileMaker to bring up a floating inspectors that are essentially versions of it, as many as you want. So a lot of people have, when they're developing a FileMaker, have a secondary screen. They probably have all 4 tabs of the inspector open over there. They can get to it. That's still there. So that we didn't take that away. However, we've got enough pushback on this that in our next VREV that I would expect is going to be a fast follow, probably sometime in very early July. We'll put a setting in that you can determine which one you want. So you just set it once, and it can be the old one or it can be the new one. The Adaptive Inspector is really good, better for people who are newer, who don't have the muscle memory and would get overwhelmed by all of the options there. Maybe a better way to start. The other thing is, at the moment, this is Mac only. So it's still the same inspector on Windows. And then once we work out the kinks and bugs, we'll probably end up bringing it to the Windows side as well. Here's a quick screenshot of the inspector. There's an appearance tab and there's a data tab. And then depending upon what it is you click on, an object or objects, then it'll show you the things that are relevant, but it won't subject you to the things that aren't. So that's essentially what that is. Next one is pretty big deal, only that people have had to figure out workarounds for this if they want to get this behavior. If you have a field of a certain size that has more text in it than the size you have, and you have to make the choice of how do you let a person know that there's more there, and if they're not allowed to edit it, then how do they enter it? So we essentially changed the UI that allows you to have greater control over who can enter using essentially a Boolean calculation that, if true, then allows you to do things like when it's locked, the user can still focus, they can scroll, they can copy the text. You can also, because it's run by calculation, determine by who the individual is or some calculation who can do what. It works both in browse and find mode. And so here is what it looks like. If you're familiar before, you didn't have these options. So the field entry behavior in the different modes, you can edit, select only, view only, or set it by calculation, and you just got a much greater control. So I know there's a number of people on this call who could talk about the kinds of things that you no longer have to do if you want to get this kind of behavior. Now it's just sort of out of the box. Something that we introduced in FileMaker 2025 was the ability to put your custom functions in folders, because over time people have created more and more custom functions, and there wasn't a way to organize them. So we introduced folders. The only problem was it didn't have the sorting behavior that people wanted. So we came back after it and we added the capability so that now in the custom function dialog, not only can you put the functions in folders, but you can sort by name, creation date, custom order. The sort will apply independently for each folder. I'll show you in a second what the difference is there. And it's essentially this. In FileMaker 2025, if you have folders, if you can see how this is sorting, it's function 1, 2, 3, and then 5, 4, right? So it's like, okay, that's not what I expect, right? So now you can see in 2026, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can flip it the other direction, ascending or descending, and now I have 5, 4, and 3, 2, 1, right? So it's just a nice enhance, because people like the folders, but they didn't like that they lost some functionality in sorting, especially if you have a whole lot. You've got naming conventions. You want to be able to find that stuff fairly easy. So that was another developer quality of life enhancement that we put in. This one, I've been at Claris for 26 years. I have heard this request for as long as I've been there, is why, oh why, are these my only choices for Zoom level? What's up with that, right? So it was fairly easy to take care of. I don't know why we didn't do it earlier, but we knocked it out this time, which essentially gives you one more option, custom. And then you can decide between, I think 25 is the lower limit, all the way up to 400 in any increment, including, 0.5 or whatever you want to use. You can set it up via, your calculation and put all your logic in there. So you can dial in exactly the size you want for where you're deploying, an iPad, an iPhone, a browser, or whatnot. So just, getting rid of some of the cumbersome things that, bother people because they're developing in our product, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, week in and week out. And it's just like, it can be maddening that to some of the simple things aren't there. So those are what we're trying to knock down in this release. This next one is got a lot of excitement since we launched on Tuesday. It was actually when we did our community live, we had about 1,100 people on that. And this turned out to be by far the most popular of the things that we announced. Jeremy Brown yesterday on FM Training TV did an entire hour on this alone, and it's going to be up on YouTube from Rich, and I'll show you some screenshots of what he showed. Vince talked about it today on FM TV. This is, in my opinion, one of the sleeper features that is going to have a lot of utility, including when we are more into the era of agentic AI. Clay often referred to this as the quadruple $. So if you know the $, you got a gosh, I lost the term for it already. Vince, help me out. Global. You got a global, and there's certain, depending on the number of $, it determines how long that persists. The reason Clay calls it quadruple $, is this persists. It travels with the file. You can close FileMaker Pro. You can close your computer, restart your computer. You bring it back up. It's still there. So that's a place where you can store things, and it's not in what a lot of people do. They have utility tables that they may, hide so that the customers don't get into it, where they're storing a lot of this stuff. Now you don't have to have that. We originally did it as a follow-up to the JavaScript add-ons that we introduced a number of years ago, because they had the funkiness of having to be set up through a layout and have scripts and all that. And now you can just take your JavaScript, store it in that file, your HTML and CSS or whatever you want to store, and store it away in that file. It's pretty straightforward. There's a new script step that allows you to set, update, or delete what is stored in that that persistent storage. It's essentially a Draco table behind the scenes. And then there's two calculation functions that allow you to act upon it. And that's to ask for what's stored there. You're able to give it a name, and I'll show you the interface in a second. So you can ask by name and ID and retrieve that and use it, say in a web viewer object or somewhere else. And then you can also get a list, because you can name these of those that you have. It'll make more sense when I show you in a second. This also persists through the data migration tool, so it doesn't get blown away from that. And there's a number of things that people can do with it. You see a couple of things here. Obviously, it's a place to store your JavaScript modules, your HTML that you may be using to populate a web viewer object. You can put version items in there. You can have user specific settings. And here is the script. So it's pretty straightforward. You give it a name. You give it an instance ID that's associated with that, because that'll be used by the calculation. And then you can put your values in it. And you also have the ability to delete from that, because you don't have direct access to that. So you're going to be able to act upon it through scripting to determine what's in there, and if you want to get it out of there. The calculations are two: get persistent data, which is the name that you gave it and the ID that you gave it, and then it will retrieve it, and you can use it wherever you want. And then the other one is list my persistent data IDs and then the names of them, and I'll show you both of those. This is what Jeremy Brown on FM Training TV yesterday demoed. And the reason I put his name there and the date is, if you want to go and watch this, go to FM Training TV, their YouTube channel. That recording is either there now or will be there shortly. It's the June 10th session. And Jeremy spent an hour. The interesting thing about this is we are just figuring out all of the uses for this because it's something pretty new. And so half of Jeremy's session was showing how it worked, but also, sort of thinking out loud of the kinds of things you can do with it. So he had he set up a persistent data store. He named it widgets. He uses a convention for getting the instance ID and then the value as well. So you can see he's using variables and stuff here. And then he shows, okay, so I'm now going to use this get persistent data ID for something I called widgets and then point of sale, and then stored in that table is all of this CSS and HTML that he's using, I believe, in a web viewer object, and it was a point of sale, a POS system that was running in the web viewer object that he has stored in there. And then when he did the list of persistent data IDs for the widgets bucket or folder that he called it, then here is what he has in there: point of sale, POS test, analysis tools, so on and so forth. So that is a new capability that people are still figuring out, what am I going to do with it? But it's got a ton of utility. And I think also it's going to come in quite handy to store things that were created using LLMs in some of the new agentic stuff as well. So I think it's going to have quite a bit of utility. We did a number of enhancements with PDFs and scripting to essentially make the entire thing as scriptable as possible. Because a lot of things you couldn't really do this directly. We have now new dedicated script steps for these options: create PDF, open PDF, append to PDF, print PDF, and save as PDF. It supports incremental document assembly, so you can go off and visit different, this layout and that table and assemble it together. Excuse me. It works both on the client side, on the desktop where FileMaker is deployed, or server side is perform script on server. And it also has the ability to use the get live text and get live text as JSON to extract from an OCR PDF, so it doesn't even necessarily have text in it, but it can read it because those technologies can, and use that as well. And so there's a number of things you can use it for: generating, multiple page reports that are assembled across in one pass. So you just got all the calculation logic to tell it what to do and where to do it. Building document packets and one output, putting things on servers, and so on. So that was sort of a late breaker that came in late to ETS, but we were to catch it before we went live to start talking about pretty much anything you can do with PDFs in our product now. It's scriptable, is I guess the short way of talking about it. Then there are a handful of a number of other things that we added that I put under the other quality of life enhancements. We've made enhancements. You can see some of there, and I won't go through them all, but there's a custom dialogue scroll bar for when there's long content that's much more eloquent. We now support WebP containers, which are about 50% smaller than PNGs or JPEGs. So if you're storing a lot of images in container fields, it can significantly reduce the footprint. It will help with performance, help with backups, speed, and whatnot, or just the cost of storage. So that's a nice little one. The replace field contents now includes a skip auto enter option if you're running in full access, so that you can do some things without clobbering the modification timestamps or usernames. There is ways now to use a calculation to dynamically create the connection strings at runtime, so they don't have to be hard coded when you're using ODBC for things like execute SQL and so on. There's some additional custom dialogue enhancements we made as well. So the combination of the scroll bar and the ability to control much more granularly that dialogue is in there. There's a new option to sort the blank record last, so you can determine where you want that blank record to show, when is at the bottom, or whatnot. So that's a nice little one. A few more here that I don't know are worth reading through. These are all be captured, by the way, in the release notes, which have a lot of stuff in them. I really encourage you to go and look at the release notes. And of course, they're all in our help files as well. Little other thing that is worth noting: when you're using FileMaker Help system for server from FileMaker Pro, you'll notice a little affordance at the top of for copying. You can copy, let's say you looked up a script, you hit that copy thing, and it literally creates an MD file that you can use with your AI tools like Claude Code and VS Code and whatnot. And then we also have all of them stored and accessible, so you could tell your favorite AI tool, again, I'll use example Claude Code, where to find these. And this is important because if you're trying to use AI to help you write scripts and calculations in FileMaker, which is one of the things that's coming this summer through the plugins that we'll be delivering, it can know, because we have documented the canonical answer of what this calculation does, what this script does. So it helps with the hallucinations, if you will, of AI potentially making up a script or a calculation that doesn't exist because it aims to please you and doesn't want to disappoint you, and you may not know that that doesn't exist. So it helps us to bound it to the sort of the official documentation. So that's pretty interesting that our team cranked that out, and we'll be talking more about that in the future about how to take advantage of those. There are just a number of little things that make it a lot easier. Like I said, I won't go through it all here. However, we are at the end of this theme, so if there's any questions about any of the developer quality of life or developer productivity things I just shared, then let me know.
It's funny, as I wasn't looking forward to this because there was a survey out there that had a bunch of options in there that we weren't really interested in, and then this comes out and there's like a bunch of things that I really care about.
Well, I was pleasantly surprised that most of the excitement, at least on the first day we launched, that we heard back from people was around these, because some of these have been floating around for quite a long time, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so the little backstory here, and I shared it yesterday, but I'll share it again today, is you have John Howell to thank for this. And the reason you have John Howell to thank for this is because John Howell had full access in Los Altos last year. He invited Ryan McCann, the CEO of Claris, to come for lunch and then to have a live Q&A session afterwards. During that live Q&A session, I think it was Dennis Burnham stood up and asked a question about developer quality of life things like this. And so I interjected, and Ryan was, listening. And I said, often when I would present at a keynote address at Engage or a DevCon, and I would present, hey, here's a major feature we did, and then I'm bridging to another major feature, I might, in the between, throw in a little sort of nugget of a developer quality of life enhancement. And I would always get so much more applause for that, that it just sort of struck me as, wow. And then I even remember one time being on stage, getting that and saying, man, it's the little things, isn't it? Right. And it always stuck with me, because I liken it to this. If you know the fable, the boy that pulled the thorn out of the lion's paw, the lion didn't eat him. The lion loved the boy because he removed the pain from the lion. So it's like, people like this stuff because you're removing pain. And it's pain because you have to deal with it, like I said, day in, day out. You're 40, 50, 60 hours a week. You're coding in FileMaker, and you've been doing it for years, and you're just being driven crazy. Like, why is this always the default? That kind of thing. So we drove Ryan back to the office after the Q&A session, and he said, Rick, I want you and Clay to form a team that identifies developer quality of life enhancements that are low-hanging fruit and begin to knock them down. So we formed a team, and we did that. We came up with a bunch of them. We got 250 developers to chime in, help us prioritize them. Believe me, we got a long list of stuff to knock down. And now every release, we will pepper these things in, because what we mean by low-hanging fruit is a single developer who doesn't need a product manager to tell them what to do can knock it out in a sprint or two, which means 2 to 4 weeks. So anytime we have the opportunity, and these things normally wouldn't make it into releases because they don't rise to the level of strategic importance, but as a category, they do. So I credit Ryan McCann with having the insight to say this needs to be done. And I credit John Howell of having the venue where that was possible, because sometimes you put the right people together and magic can happen. So you will see a lot more of this in the future. There is no end of these things to do. I used to, when I was running product management, I had 26,000 feature requests that I was sitting on. And there were a few that were out. People wanted sync. People wanted, FileMaker Go for Android, but the rest of it was like an even smear throughout the entire platform. So in a release where you can do maybe 10 or 20 of these, which of the 26,000 do you choose? And so, it's an ongoing battle. But anyway, it's a concerted effort now. And so I'm pleasantly surprised that a lot of people noticed that and liked it more than I actually would have guessed. But I'm not surprised.
Yes.
Very
Rick?
cool.
Hey, Rick.
Uh-huh.
Rick, this is John. I think you should give Richard Carlson some credit for helping to put that meeting together.
That's true. In fact, I asked Rich if I could drive with him when he gave Ryan the ride back to the office so I could talk to him. And that's where it came about. So yeah, right place, right time, right people. But yeah, absolutely. Rich made it possible as well. Probably Dennis is the one to set the ball rolling though.
We got a couple of questions. David, why don't you go ahead? David.
Yeah, I've put a couple of things in the chat there. First of all, on the negative side of things, I don't think my complaints are all about muscle memory for the inspector. I think the new inspector is just wrong, and it doesn't work the way that the marketing says that it works. For example, it says that things disappear when you're not using them or when you don't need them. They don't disappear. There are lots of things that are just grayed out. And it means that the new inspector is very big. For some reason, they put more space into the inspector, which means you have to scroll further in those two panels than you ever have had before. And things have suddenly got larger in there. So it's, my complaint about the new inspector is that it's just wrong. Not
fair enough. Yeah.
Muscle memory.
Fair enough. That's we'll take that. And we'll do what we can there. But we are also given the ability to go back to the old one. So
yeah. I'd love to have a chat with the UX developer on that because they've just made some really bad mistakes in there.
Yeah, it's a hard one. It is a really hard one to get right, and I'm glad that Claris is receiving the feedback and pivoting, and maybe it's got to go back and bake for longer. So we'll see.
Yeah, could be.
David, did you have another question or follow up, or because Tony else?
Yeah, just in the a couple of things about the persistent data stuff. One is that Jeremy noted that the text in that dialogue is wrong. If you can bring up that,
you mean the description
data?
Yeah, the description.
That description, slide 29. Yeah, that description. Yeah. You can use an instance ID to group entries that have a common purpose. That's wrong. It should say you can use a name to group entries by a common purpose.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think mentioned that yesterday. I'll make sure that information gets to the IT team, and maybe we can clean it up in the next update.
Yeah. So a question on that: why is there a reason why the name is not being able to be done by calculation?
That's also come up. I don't know. Good question. I wasn't the product manager obviously anymore, but it seems like from what I've heard in the few days it's been out that would, I don't know if it came up in ETS or not, but yeah.
And one third thing, why isn't there a function for retrieving the list of names like the list of instance IDs?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Dave, write those all up. Email to me. I'll get them into the hands of the right people, and that's good stuff. So,
yeah.
Okay. Thanks. You, David.
Tony? All right. I'm okay. Yeah.
One more question.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. So two of the features that I'd put into my top 10, at least for now, the ability to position, size, and empower scrolling of a show custom dialogue, that's bread and butter. So that's awesome. The ability to zoom, also awesome. What would pair well with this would be the get doc specification. What we try to do, if we have a picker, a dialogue, a card window, any of those, I'm often inclined to position it precisely to the right of the object that's clicked or the field that's relevant. And same with the zoom, the ability to discern where the doc is, because I just tested get content width, get content height, doesn't take into consideration with the doc. If we could include that in the mathematics, it would make these awesome features even more awesome.
All right, Tony, send that to me as well.
Okay, and then final thought, I tagged you on the community on my comments on the inspector, so I'll save that for later, because you probably got an email from community about my concerns. Terrific version.
Thanks, Tony.
So I'll try to go faster through here because there's a lot to cover, and I think we have a stop at 7. So let's soldier on. So under platform stability and support, we now support multiple SASE processes on server. There's concurrency of these processes, so they're not bottlenecked. They can help with performance. They're going to come in handy when in the agentic era, where there's a lot more potential, calls coming in, and it takes advantage of the hardware on your system. So there's nothing you have to do other than you could control it. For instance, you see here that you can go in the server admin console and set it so that if a plugin requires that these processes be single processed, you can ratchet it back down there. But it'll take advantage of your system hardware up to a certain extent. And another nice piece is if the web publishing engine, the OData or data API services go down, they will auto restart. They will still put something in the crash log so that you know it happened, but you don't have to have a user go find someone to talk to because the process went down and then they have to come and turn it back on. It'll just heal itself. These are stateless, so you don't have to start the database engine. But in an era where, your web publishing engine goes down, WebDirect doesn't work, right? OData and data API are being highly leveraged by AI especially, and custom web publishing and all the powerful new things you can do. So this makes these a little bit more robust and self-healing. It doesn't require someone to have to physically go in and restart them. So that's in the 2026 release. We now have the ability to export field contents on the server, which, believe it or not, we have not had before. And so there are a number of things that people had to work around if they wanted to pull that off. So you're probably all aware of the affordance in the product of showing which scripts function with what environments. You can see here that it's saying I have show me the server compatible scripts, and in 2025 export field contents would be grayed out, and now it is something that you can use. So that's going to be a powerful or a much easier way to do things than you did before. And then on the FileMaker Go side, besides Go supporting what we've done in 2026, where it makes sense, sometimes there's things that don't make sense on these devices that make sense on a desktop, but essentially has parity with what 2026. But some additional enhancements just for the iOS things, the Flash or Torch insert, so you can turn it on through scripting without having the user have to turn it on manually. So if you're in low light environments in a warehouse or something where you're going to be doing some scanning and you want to use the the flash or the torch. You can control that. For our Japanese market, they have a error-based date, and some things require that as the official date, and it's based on who the emperor is. So that's now supported on FileMaker Go. It's also supported, in the rest of the platform. But I can remember we had to wait for a VREV of a product because the emperor died, and we didn't know who the new emperor was going to be yet for sure. And we had to wait until they chose the emperor to VREV our product. For many of us, it may seem odd, but for the Japanese market, which is about a quarter of all the sales we do in the world is in Japan alone, believe it or not, it was quite significant for them. There's a number of controls now that allow you to have more precise control over the windows on iOS devices through Window UUID and Get Window ID, so that you can make sure that what you intended, you're acting on the window that you intended to act on, and so on. Just gives you a little bit more fine-grained control. And then there's a number of updates to the frameworks or operating systems. We now support OpenSSL 3.5 LTS. We upgraded Apache Tomcat. We now are certified to run on Windows Server 2025. We've made some additional enhancements to IPv6 support because the world's running out of IP addresses, and so IPv6 is getting more and more utilized. And we made some enhancements there as well. Of course, we fully support Mac OS 2026, and probably in fall that'll be Golden Gate as well when that comes out. We'll obviously have the betas throughout the summer. There's some enhancements to being able to specify the OS user on FileMaker Server when running on Ubuntu that gives you more control. And then the assistant install text will now allow you to install the command line developer tools as well, so you can push those out through the installer. We probably can take some brief questions before I move on to this section, but I'm not sure, Eric, what time you guys normally end. If it's hard,
actually, we go as late as 8. So
okay.
It's really up to you, actually.
Okay. That's good to know. Okay. Any questions on the things I just covered on platform support and stability? All right, I'll move on. Okay, so fundamentally, under this section is pretty significant enhancement to accessibility for WebDirect for people who are using screen readers. There are certainly in the U.S. federal requirements. In other countries, there are other statutory requirements for anyone who receives federal funds. So, nonprofits, educational institutions, higher ed, that they accommodate people with disabilities, and primarily this is people with visual disabilities, and so they have a screen reader, but the product can be unreadable in the sense of, we put some stuff over the years to control some of the tabbing and that sort of thing, but pretty much was not so usable by people with visual disabilities. So we've made a number of enhancements here that make it much more usable. And there's not a thing you have to do to your files at all to take advantage of this. You just go into the Server Admin Console under the Connectors tab. There's a new web direct accessibility box that you can tick, and then it brings up this dialog that will turn on those controls, and then it will be much more usable through screen reader. So that's a pretty big deal for some of our large governmental organizations, Yale University, Stanford. These they always have pressure because you have to have accommodations, and typically these things work best through web browsers, probably the best at accessibility. So WebDirect is the one that we go with there. There's a number of other enhancements that we made on the WebDirect side We updated to JDK 21 because we use behind the scenes for the WebDirect. We're using the JDK. There was some issues with IPv6 addresses not rendering correctly and ends up with a blank page. That's been resolved. Some cookies that were prevent cross-site request vulnerabilities. We've addressed that. There was a irritating sort of 1 to 1.5 second. There was some irritating 1 to 1.5 second freeze when you're tabbing between or past popover buttons, and so that's been addressed as well. So a few things that we're able to address on the WebDirect side. And then Japanese calendar support I already talked about. That's also supported in WebDirect. It's supported in FileMaker Pro, FileMaker Go, FileMaker WebDirect. Works with all the existing data fields and so on. So that is accessibility in WebDirect. And if there are any questions there, I have my last section, which is what did we do to continue down the path of AI-ready architecture in the product? But any questions about the accessibility or WebDirect enhancements?
I don't see any questions right now.
Okay. All right, let's move on. This was a pretty nice little one as well. So in service of AI, in service of your naming conventions and how you want things to sort, and sometimes people have names of fields that are not too understandable to AI. You now have the ability to tell AI what the intent of the field is. And I'll show you that in a second. Essentially, when you're in Managed Database and you're on the Fields tab and in the Advanced button, it will bring up a dialog. I'll show you in a second that you can put in text that is intended for AI tools to read, to understand how am I to think about what this field represents, and think about that as a way to help prevent hallucinations or it guessing because it couldn't figure it out, and you can just tell it directly. This will surface in the DDL as well. So I think tools like Inspector Pro, Vince, don't they come along in the XML that you can leverage them as well?
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. So this is what it looks like. So here I am in the Managed Database. I'm on the Fields tab. I click on a field and I click on Advanced, and I don't have it in here, but in that dialog down below, there's a little button that says Advanced. When you click on that, it's going to bring up this dialog, and that's where you put the text in that's going to then annotate. It's going to be in the data definition language, or the DDL. That's where AI can get at it. That's where tools like Inspector Pro and others can get at it. But this is sort of a dual purpose thing here, because not only does it annotate for AI, so it has a better understanding of what the intent of that is. You see this customized field display names option, which essentially is a way of getting friendly field names, which is something else that people have been asking for as long as I've been working for Claris or FileMaker. And that dialog, when you click on that, it pops up this calculation, and there's a JSON sort of already in there. And this may seem a little esoteric. What is this? FM_common, export, sort, table view. And then there's these blank quotes, and it's a JSON string, right? So those blank quotes in there, you could take and put what it is you want displayed for that field name that may be, something that your customer wouldn't understand. If they have to import or export, they might not know what it is. And then you can control that across the board, or when you're doing exports, or when you're sorting, or table view. So it's pretty elaborate. So what I'm going to say is actually go into the FileMaker Pro help and go into defining advanced field options. It's a new thing here, and it has all of this information about what can be done with this sort of dual purpose new dialogue that's for AI in annotating fields and telling AI what it's for, but also can be used to essentially come up with friendly field names. You can even do things like localized labels depending upon the operating system, language that's set. And you can have for Italian, use this label. For French, use that label. So you can build all this stuff in now. Pretty straightforward. There's some reserved for FM_ now, so be careful there. But there's a lot of versatility in there, more than that can be covered in sort of this eye chart slide. But it's easy to miss because those two capabilities are sort of munched together in that single dialogue. So I thought it was worth calling out. I didn't talk about this yesterday when I presented FM Borough, but that was caught to be confusing because we were sort of munging the two together. So again, there's the help. It's just, go in the help and under defining advanced field options, and it'll explain all of that you saw on this slide right there. Similar base table comments is associated with the table itself. We've had already in the previous release, if you put a bracket for LLM for large language model, and then it would know to be able to use that, but that was a little bit funky. And if you didn't put it in there, it was different behavior. So now we just have base table comments. So similar to the field annotations. This is to help AI systems know what your intent is for a particular table, what kind of data is in that table. And especially when you're asking AI to understand a FileMaker solution that you're pointing it to because you want it to do something for you, the more it understands about what the intent of your fields are, what the intent of the data in that particular table occurrence is on your graph, the better it is able to accurately give you what you're asking for it. So we've added that as well. And here's the sort of straightforward calc: is base table comment, what's the file name and what's the base table name, and then it'll pick up the annotation or the comment in that. Another pretty big deal is we've made some enhancements to the save as XML dialog, and especially if used in conjunction with the solution upgrade tool. So essentially, what this allows you to do is to take a FileMaker.fmp12 file and deserialize it as XML, bring it into a tool, your favorite LLM or other tool, make the changes to the XML, and then push them back into FileMaker and reserialize it, or serialize and deserialize, right? So this is something that we've been working on for a while. It's come out in enhancements through various versions. It's getting more and more powerful. People like Vince are taking advantage of it now as well. So here is the save as a copy as XML dialog in the tools under FileMaker Pro. And then when that comes up, you can see the fine grain control that you have on all of the catalogs. So you can have all of them. You can have one of them. If you just are interested in, say, you're going to do a diff of scripts, you can just push out that catalog. Notice there's a little, we should just call this Vince. Include details for analysis tools, for Inspector Pro, for some of the other tools out there that allow them to take advantage of this as well. I don't know, Vince, if you have anything to say in particular about this new capability and what it means for analysis tools like yours and stuff. But
it's great. It's getting closer to the ability to just generate small snippets of XML. I mean, right now we can carve out just the individual catalogs and combine this with the plugin API, where you can register a plugin to receive schema notifications. And as soon as you modify a script, it'll send a notification that catalog changed. you can then fire a script to generate the catalog and process the catalog. But ideally, eventually, we would want to just get the snippet of XML for that script, and maybe have the option to get the snippet of XML in the FM upgrade tool format. So then you don't even have to, carve up the XML in any special way. You just copy it, paste it right to the developer tool, and off you go. You can patch together a bunch of changes that you made, and you can kind of sequence those and say, okay, I want to update this with these field changes, this script change, this layout, and now you've got like a whole workflow that you can put together. Anyway, there's a lot of cool things that can be done with that. I will say this, that the DDR is on a deprecation list, and that's a XML 1.0, and that does not have support for persistent data store. So, I don't think any more work is going into the DDR. I think this is the future. Is everything is basically poured into save as XML.
Yeah, and that's the path we're heading down. And as Vince said, we're trying to get more and more granular, and we'll continue to do that so that you don't have to spend tons of money on tokens parsing through some gigantic XML document, but you can be a little bit more precise as we get down to the level that Vince is talking about. And he continues to push us forward on this, and has been doing for years, and significantly improving, the functionality of the product and what you can do. Sort of the nirvana of being able to just, be able to use a tool outside, change something. You can change all the names of something and just sort of find and replace and then push it back in. So that's a pretty big deal. I think another sleeper that's going to have a lot of utility. Also, what we've done, we will now support the Google Gemini model along with the other models we already support in 2025. And we've also made some additional enhancements to the augmented retrieval or RAG for things like, pointing to documents or PDFs, and being able to, use those as the thing that the LLM uses. So with RAG, you can point to, I've seen already developers who have, say, solution bundle agreement or, horizontal solutions that they sell, and they put their online or their help in that, and then allow their customer just to query with natural language, and it brings up their rich help system. But there's a lot of power there as well. So for the settings for the RAG stuff, it's under AI services. It's a radio button you can enable or disable. When you enable it, then there's these other controls that come up that allow you to have more fine control over what it is. You can see here also the import RAG spaces, where you may have different files or different systems that are using RAG, and you can bring them over if you want to use them there as well. And then there's even a little chat affords down here where you can say, hey, enable RAG, here's my keys. And then you can even put a prompt template in if you want, and you can just start asking it natural language questions, and it will read from your RAG store. So continue to make some enhancements on that side of the house through the FileMaker admin console. And this is what we were already talking about: the ability to create an FMP12 file through the solution upgrade tool using patch. So if you have the XML and then you make some changes through it, and then you want to push it back in to FileMaker, you can do that through the solution upgrade tool, and it will handle all of the schema elements in one pass: the tables, fields, table recurrences, so on. It does have limitations that we are aware of, and we'll continue down the path because we need this for AI to act upon FileMaker files. So there's certain things that you cannot do, like you can append to the end of a script, but you can't infuse in the middle of a script. Custom functions, you've got to replace them rather than acting upon them. And then the tool will always report that the patch file was applied, even if it ran into one of these things. We're aware of those things. And along with the enhancements to the product, we'll make in order to make it a better environment to use things like Claude Code, VS Code, and other tools, Cursor, on the file. We'll continue to refine these to make them easier to close the sort of gaps that, for instance, a lot of people are doing things now with AI tools and FileMaker, but there's more than one flavor of copy and paste. Layouts has one thing, scripts have another. People have plugins for it, or they're just have that limitation. So there are some things that only we can do at Claris inside FileMaker to get rid of that. The third parties can't. So in conjunction with things like Proof and some of the things people are working on, were they running into limitations because of what FileMaker does and doesn't allow? Those are the things we're on the lookout for, so that we make it as a iterative flow as possible, because you don't want to get a piece of XML, open it up in some other tool, and then copy it and paste it back and look at it. It just sort of breaks that vibe, if you will. So we're working on progressively knocking those things down. And so as AI progresses, FileMaker will also be inheriting the things that will make this stuff more and more eloquent and powerful. Here's just an example of the solution upgrade tool using the command line to patch a file. And then I think the last piece I have here is enhancements we made to the AI model server. We introduced the AI model server in 2025, and this is the ability to not go out to the cloud and use these big foundation models and have to pay for the tokens. And then maybe I'm sending my data, my CII, or my confidential information on my customers, what's actually being sent out there. Am I dumping it on someone and now it's out on the internet and other models are taking advantage of it? Well, how do I control that? I can control that by in my own AI model server on my own hardware. But it needs, these models aren't small, and it needs a lot of processing power, and it needs processing power like GPUs give you that aren't necessarily cheap. So an NVIDIA type GPU. It turns out that Apple makes some of the best hardware in the world for this stuff. So people are going out and getting their Mac Minis and throwing these at that. But it gives two things. One, I think at this point, there's millions of free open source Hugging Face models of all different sizes, all different capabilities, all different powers. People are experimenting with them. Some take more computing power than others. But you get two advantages if you're doing this yourself. You don't have to expose your data by going outside of your environment and sending it to some cloud, company that then you don't know what they're going to do with it. And it can save you on tokens that they're charging you for when you're using their service. So when you factor in the more and more you use AI, it can be more and more costly as you chew through tokens, depending upon the plan you have. So if you factor in the cost, let's say you take a beefy box from Apple, it's $8,000 to do what you wanted to do with some of the models you want to do. Factor in the money you would save for the token usage, as well as the fact that your data can stay confidential. And we made some additional enhancements on the RAG side as well, on the AI model server. And then here is the AI services tab in the FileMaker admin console. And this is where you turn on the model server. It gives you a link so you can take you to Hugging Face and take a look at all of the things they have there, the different models for doing different things. There's different footprints, some are small, and always experiment with them because you may not need the biggest model. But you need something that'll do what you want it to do accurately. So there's a lot of choices there to do that. Here's an example of a bunch of models. You can add them. You can download them from Hugging Face. You can load them and load them and so on. It's the same place I showed you before that had the chat built in when I was talking about the RAG space. And those are the 5 themes. Other than that, we didn't do anything in FileMaker 2026 of interest. But any questions on this last stuff? Or have I fatigued you?
Wow, that was intense. Tony, you have your question.
Yeah, I certainly a presentation worthy of a question, so I'll make one up here. With the code that's generated by these external companies, the XML, how carefully, and when you paste it, and this actually applies to the paste and all the tools, how carefully is that code vetted or sanitized or checked against a DTD? Or there's a lot, I'm listening to a lot of people in the community who are building templates of all the script steps, for example, with the goal of being able to provide the artificial intelligence with the skill to recognize XML that's properly formatted. But I'm wondering how much gatekeeping, if you can say, how much gatekeeping Claris is doing.
Yeah, so obviously it's possible because people are doing it, and a lot of people are doing their stuff on Git. There's FM Dojo. There's these other tools. So it doesn't even require a lot of what we did in order to be able to leverage that. But where we're heading with the agentic coding stuff that we announced last month on the script and the calculation and the data models, that will all be defined from us. And so if you're using our tools, then that'll be what it validates it against. And we'll put in, this is what we expect a well-formed snippet of XML for this thing to look like. And so that will be the tool or the skill that then it points to. So it's a lot of work. We've had to go through every single script, every single calc, and every single object. What is the XML definition of X, Y, and Z object? But all that will be there. All of it's being worked on now. Part of what our content team did with making available the MD files, so that what we are documenting becomes the canonical sort of truth. Because who knows what was done by who and how accurate it was, right? So it's not to say that it's 100% guarantee, because AI in a way has a will of its own because of the very nature of what it is. It's just a statistical likelihood that this will follow that, right? So the more you can bound it, the more accurate it'll be. But we'll have all that stuff built in, and that's part of the giant body of work, and that's underway right now.
Awesome, because I certainly trust FileMaker more than those other people. I'm glad you're working on it.
David?
Go ahead.
I'd just like to comment that I am very impressed with the change that's been made in this version in terms of the documentation around this stuff. For example, the What's New in FileMaker 2026 page is outstanding in terms of particularly the column about use when, because I think the thing that I've been banging on for probably 10 or 15 years is what the hell were you thinking when you released that feature? What is it supposed to be used for? What did you intend it to be used for? And for example, in something like persistent data, there's a comment that says, this is the primary use case that we were thinking about when we released this feature. And so I think all of that documentation goes a long way towards explaining why the feature was put in there and what you intend people to use it for. Obviously what people will use it for is different, and you'll find out a lot of stuff from that in the next couple of months. But I think the whole documentation around this stuff is an outstanding positive change. So congratulations on that.
Well, yeah, thank you. I agree that, we've gone from a laundry list of, hey, this is what this is, to more about here's what we did, here's why we did it, here's who we did it for, here's how you might use it. And of course, the other thing is we always put in a feature that we had a certain intention for, and then you guys show us what could really be done with it. And like, think about the web viewer object and what it was really for and what it has turned into. And that is perfectly fantastic. I love it, because we had one intention and you guys are so damn clever that you do 10 other things and show us. Like, for instance, this persistent data store, it's a sleeper. It's going to have a ton of utility. Some clever people are going to be able to figure out some very clever things, and we don't know what they all are. And that sort of keeps it exciting. And then we'll look at stuff, and then we'll put it back in the product where it makes sense. But yeah, I agree. Thanks, Dave. Darren?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment also on the MD files for the help. In the process of building that skill as a reference of the functions, AI really didn't know where to look on the HTML files. And then to be able to look at the data structure, all the Chrome that was around the help files for a person to be able to find what they need, that text file that I put in the chat, followed by all the MD files, it's a beautiful way to let AI know what the functions of FileMaker are. And the basic concept I built with that skill was to say, here is a skill step. Does it exist in the list? Right. What do you have locally about it? Okay. Very basic things. What version it was introduced, an example of the syntax to use that skill. But now go back to that MD file. You know where that MD file is now, and go and get the full details from Claris, from the source.
Yeah, I agree. No, that's a pretty big deal. I was so happy that our documentation team had gone down that path, that they were thinking that way, because here's the thing. If you're just relying on large language models that crawl the entire internet, well, guess what? There's a ton of garbage about FileMaker out there too. So what is the best way? So it's probably best that we say, this is it. This is what it is. This is why it is. And, always our examples have always been, they haven't necessarily been the best. They're sort of straightforward, but at least you have the bounds, right? And an authoritative place to jump off of that, because, I remember one user group I was at where, David Head was talking about, scripting and the arguments he was having with AI, who was, trying to convince him that it knew what it was talking about, and you had to wrestle it to the ground. So, right. So the more we can do to help you say, in a way, it's like RAG inside the product, right? Is like, no, don't go out to the internet. Go here. Here is where you should understand what is possible and what's capable and what it does. That's your body of truth. It'll still have creativity, obviously, in there, but it gets it closer to, the determinism that we need, to the certainty that something that we put in is actually going to do exactly what it is we wanted it to do, right? And you don't want this wiggliness. You use the wrong word and all of a sudden it changes the association but it was just a word. It didn't change anything about that. So I agree. Vince?
Yeah. I don't remember now if the help has this or not, but going down the route that David was saying about the new documentation where it says this is the feature and use it, and here's some suggested uses of it, right? I wonder if that that could be extended into the MD files as a kind of a suggestion. Like I don't remember now. I haven't looked at the help. I was going to look at it just now, but maybe if it isn't there, that would be great to have suggested uses even in the help, and that would then follow through into the MD files that come off of that as well, so that the AI would then get not just here's how you work with this tool, but here's some suggested uses of it, and I would also like to suggest that maybe that could be community driven in some way. I don't know how that could be organized, but like you said, all kinds of clever people came up with creative uses of the web viewer and things that Claris never even thought of. but like you find some novel ways to use persistent data store, all of a sudden add that to the list. And now it just builds a long list of like, wow, this is really cool uses. Um,
I agree.
yeah,
That's the dream I have of this
yeah,
stuff, because the entire FileMaker community can be elevated if the best of us are putting skills. Like I said, I would kill for the Ray Colligan calculation skill, right? Because
mhm,
I was always impressed by what he did. Or I want the Kevin Frank JSON, parsing trick skill, because the more of the stuff and it's like, and these skills are everywhere, right? The Matt Petrowski skill and how to do the X, Y, or Z. And then they're either a marketplace or they're open source, and then people can get these things and they can use them in their tools. It just elevates everyone. And we're going into an era where it's hard to say where the edges are, and it'll be easier than ever for someone maybe to get started with FileMaker, but it doesn't necessarily mean they know what they're doing or what they're seeing or if it was properly constructed. But you take a very experienced, successful FileMaker developer and you pair them with these tools, watch out. I mean, it's
yeah,
a marriage made in heaven, because you guys know what it is you're seeing. David knows to argue with the AI and to get that out of it, and then he can train it, and it will be a better tool for him, right? And he might say, here's the David Head scripting skill, that I want to distribute as an MD file. So I think that this is going to be a very interesting space, and it's moving so fast. None of this was really that possible a year ago. In about
yeah,
January timeframe, the models got so powerful that all of a sudden it was a whole new world. Well, these powerful models are going to create the next more powerful models. So this, I don't think any of us know where we're going to head. It's not just FileMaker by any stretch of the imagination. It's all of software development, and they're still trying to grapple, what can AI do, and where does AI need guardrails by someone who knows what they're doing, right? And I think that skill is maybe even more valuable.
yeah. I think before going to the Vienna calling event, I messaged Jay and I said to him, I think we're witnessing the event horizon as things are happening faster than we can understand the implications of them. So,
Yeah.
like you're looking at some podcast or you're looking at, trying to understand the implications of some new model from Anthropic or whatever, and you haven't even gotten to process that. There's already something else. Like and you don't, like it's all happening so quickly. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's happening
Um,
on the fly. It's
yeah.
accelerating. It's addicting. People are, not sleeping. It's sort of like gamers that finally pass away because they've been playing the same game for 3 days. It's really that nature. But the event horizon, I agree, because the thought
Yeah.
is that smarter people begin to notice something changing, and then all of a sudden you're on the other side of it and go, "What just happened?" I mean, the scary stuff, like all your money could be gone because someone figured out how to hack the banking system. Where it's gone. How's it ever get? That's just scary, right? So we don't know the world we're entering, in my opinion, right? Because
Yeah.
if you think social media over the last 20 years changed the world, watch out.
Yeah.
So it's an exciting time. It's a time to be cautious. It's a time to explore. It's a time not to get too enamored with the hype cycle, because these still have hype cycles, but there's some sort of self-curing to this, and where it's heading, hopefully it's somewhere good. I don't think any of us
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah. It's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell how it how it will be like, that you just
it
speak something and something happens.
it is so powerful that you can take a 41-year-old product and vibe code it. That's freaking amazing,
Yeah.
because we happen to have the foresight of doing things with XML or putting, this hook or that hook in, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden, thank God we did things like the web viewer object and RESTful APIs and JSON and some of the things we did to take us from being a data island to being open to the world. But it ain't your father's FileMaker, that's for sure.
Yep. But then on that comment, it's not your father's FileMaker, but everybody and their grandmother are parsing and exploding the XML these days.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, you know. And that's where you kind of see this kind of funny feeling where it's like an all you can eat buffet, but it's not meaning that it's good food. It's just the plethora of food, right? So you can vibe code something and all of a sudden you have like some amazing thing, but you know, to get it to work and do that, you have to install all these command line things. And it's not to say that, you know, you want it to be sheltered from that, but you want to have the taste, the experience, so that you just not, you know, overwhelmed with all these options. And that's what I see a little bit sometimes when you move so quickly and there's a lack of, and I hate to use the word taste, but there's a lack of taste, you know. So
it may be a feast made for cockroaches, according to Dave.
Yeah.
There's one thought here. It's with great power comes great responsibility. Plus one on whoever said that, you know, there's a lot of the more good code that's out there. You know, David Head's doing his script logic. I don't know if I don't want to pre-announce anything, but I've one of our esteemed members has some suggestions on, you know, putting out good modules. So with great power comes great responsibility. I personally think people should be able to, you know, should read whatever code is generated by some magical genie. You still got to read it. You still got to understand it. Otherwise, you're not really a developer.
Yeah, take the discipline to do that. And you guys have a huge head start. But I agree. I think it's the combo. What I have found is the more you bring to it, the more it brings to you. But you are responsible, right? It's still you in the end who did this, right? And AI is not doing it on its own. Someone's telling it what to do. So anyway, I do have to go now. These are the kinds of things now that we can talk about for hours and hours. Believe me, it's happening already. People are going down rabbit holes, and but guess what? They're finding themselves way back to FileMaker and realizing they understand a whole heck of a lot: how to model data, how to build things that businesses can run on, that they can rely on. So there's a lot of maturity in this community that it has to bring. So I have some, because of that, and because it's not leaving you guys behind, because it needs you. I have some optimism that we're going to a good place. But like I said, I can't guarantee it. You know, none of us can. But anyway, thank you for having me. Thank you, Eric, if you're still around. Yeah, there you are at the top.
Thanks,
you,
Rick.
Thanks,
Rick. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, Rick.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I forgot to unmute myself. Oh, I said bye.
Jim, you had something?
Yeah. Yeah. My company, you hear me? Yeah, my company finally at the point that it's the end of its site license, which had everybody captured at mostly FileMaker 18 and early 19. And now the cybersecurity demons have made that impossible to stay. So we're in the process of getting new licenses for, in essence, all of the infrastructure at the company. So
you're getting 26 licenses?
Well, we're getting new licenses so we could go with, let's just say 22 or 26. I'm very impressed. However, there's always, you know, the general rule, let somebody else, you know, collect the bugs first before you go out. So I don't know how well the early testing program has done as far as finding critical bugs that would say, okay, wait, but we have some cybersecurity deadlines coming up fairly shortly. So I guess I'm asking as a general question, how do people feel about moving forward quickly? Because I don't want to have to migrate twice, because I know that migrating twice is going to take a lot of extra effort to do. I'd really like to move into 26 if I can, but I'm going to have to, convince my management that that's a wise thing to do.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you, Jim.
What's your time frame on that?
Yeah.
Middle of July is when we start having trouble with our cybersecurity folks again.
Oh, it's a little early for the first release to come out, follow-up release to come out.
I heard Rick say something about early July
of
some sort.
Yeah, I mean, there's already testing in ETS for follow-up updates and stuff like that. But I haven't, I am on ETS. I haven't seen anything major. But, it's, there's always things to fix. And like, David was pointing out with the inspector, that was like a real disaster. And I'm glad that they're giving us an option to still use the old one till they figure that out.
Well, as a disaster, you mean like unlikable, not necessarily
unlikable. Yeah, like unlikable. Yeah, it's so disliked, so wonderfully disliked. I don't know what the right adjective is, but yeah. So
I just use my other version to do layout design, and then come back for everything else.
Yeah. I don't know whether there's a new feature in FileMaker that has been as much disliked as that.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Scary.
So
and I don't know what they were even trying to do. I don't know what the problem was. I don't know what problem they were trying to solve. I certainly haven't had a lot of feedback from users to say that they really hate the inspector and it's hard to use.
Yeah.
You have had a lot of feedback?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you haven't. Okay.
So I don't know why they were even working on it. There are, in my opinion, a lot of things that they could have been working on instead.
Oh, by the way, this is our option. We can continue recording if we're going to say anything clever and want it on the recording, or I can stop the recording now and free to talk about anything as much as you want.
I would say we stop the recording just because Rick is done, and that's pretty much the presentation that we gave, and then we could just chat a little longer or whatever.
Yeah.
But
all right. What do you think, Tony? Same?
I vote stop. But before we do that, I just want to say that FileMaker is the greatest software platform ever.
Okay. We'll see if we can get that on the recording.
It's my standard close.
It's when you ask AI, what does Tony say about FileMaker? It always finds this quote from
Does
him.
it?
No, I'm just teasing.
We haven't tried.
It will.
All right. Well, closing the recording, and if you're only watching the recording, you missed some really good talk after that.
Well played.